In the world of the gods, right above a high stone tower, on which a huge fire dragon climbs, wrapping his whole body around it, a large portal opened in the sky. Accompanied by raging lightning, 6 gods appeared. Finally, they found the one they had been looking for so long, so that he would be fully responsible for everything. A young man named Waidato, standing barefoot on the ground, looked up at the sky and clicked, seeing the gods again. The divine king of the 9 suns angrily called out to Wai, and began shouting at the young man for defecating anywhere, as a result of which 3 of the 9 suns were extinguished. Now, the king can only be called the divine king of the 6 suns. Waidato crossed the line. Then another god appeared, the master of the void. He recalled to Wai that when he was 2 years old, farting in a dream, he destroyed a small 3,000-year-old world of the master of the void, on which he spent 5,000 years. The other 4 gods, the Buddha of lightning and thunder, the Holy Virgin of heaven, the beast god and the ancestor of the sword, also joined in, recalling to the young man all his sins. When Wai was 3 months old, he tied the strongest dragons in a bow, black and gold. It's been 3,000 years, and they haven't unraveled. In a year and a half, Waidato, with his one sneeze, smashed the sword of fate into toothpicks, which took 10,000 years to temper. The gods continued to shout accusations at the young man, reminding him that at 2 years and 3 months, out of curiosity, he made a hole in the heavenly city, and the gods had to spend 100,000 years to fix it. Waidato was frankly bored, listening to all this, and scratched the back of his neck, yawning. The gods shouted to Wai that everything he had done was bad. However, realizing that Wai was not yawning at all, but was about to sneeze, the deities quickly turned around to run away, swearing at the same time. They need to get out soon, or they'll die. Waidato took a lot of air into his mouth and sneezed so hard that a huge fiery lightning destroyed the top of the divine city, established from the beginning of the universe by the great emperor of heaven, the heavenly pillar, the symbol of the heavenly city. In the sky, accompanied by fiery lightning, the great emperor of the sky appeared. The deities looked at the emperor with tears in their eyes, acknowledging their guilt before him. They knelt down, begging for forgiveness for not being able to keep what the emperor had left. They shouted that they were useless, since they could not even do that. The gods were filled with bitter tears. It would be better if they failed on the spot than the top of the divine city. Waidato stood and silently watched the performance of the gods with his arms crossed over his chest. The gods wondered if their crying scene would work and if they had a way out of the situation. The gods want Wai to be moved and then they conceal his power. Suddenly, Waidato said that he could hear their thoughts freely, and the gods began to lament and swear because they forgot that his cultivation was higher than divine. Waidato closed his eyes, exhaling. He appealed to the gods not to cry, because didn't they want to seal his power? He beckoned them to him, showing that he was not resisting. The gods were delighted with the offer, saying that no one pulled Wai's tongue and that he would not regret it. They weren't going to miss this opportunity, and so as long as he agreed, they should seal his power faster. The deities surrounded Waidato from all sides, directing their seals at him. Who has the seal of the 9 suns and 10 earths? Who has the ocean of lightning? The divine king of the 9 suns forgot that he now owns the art of the 6 suns, corrected himself, and, together with the other gods, released a bright stream of power into Waidato. From all sides, power rained down on the young man. Lightning flashed in a circle that dazzled the eye. Wai began to glow, reflecting all the forces from himself. The gods were not ready for such a turn, because they did not expect that Wai's body was capable of such a thing. They began to wonder what kind of monster he was. Meanwhile, Waidato looked at the gods, calling them a bunch of weak chickens, and decided that he would do everything himself. He poured out his power and it struck the peak of the divine city like lightning. The gods stared at what was happening with huge eyes, surprised at such power. It was due to too much cultivation, so Wai had to completely restrain his power of the seal of 900 million suns. Wai announced to the gods that from today, there will no longer be a person with the name Waidato in the divine city. He goes to the lower world and starts from the lowest level, then to climb up, because this is the only way to curb this power. The gods started shouting at the young man to stop, but Wai was already rushing down from the ledge of the cliff like the fastest arrow. He eventually found a worthy excuse to descend into the world and play around. On the continent of Xuanchen, in Tianjin City, the main street was very crowded and lively. A lot of people stood near the shops and invited everyone to take part in the new assessment of students. To support the monks, the Tianji Pavilion launches a special free training program for every third. To become idols in the spiritual world, you need to come to the Beimeikian Jiao Tower. Xiaxian 101 is recruiting interns. Suddenly, a young man falls out of the shop into the middle of the aisle. He is kicked and falls to the ground, looking angrily at the one who kicked him out while clicking. A heavyset man with a bun on his head and crossed arms on his chest looks down at Y and asks how it is not a shame for such garbage without spiritual roots to turn to their gates of the royal beast. The man continues to lament, kicking Y. out. The people standing behind ask if he is not ashamed to come to worship the gate of the royal beast without spiritual roots. And where did Y lose his conscience? The Beast King's Gate is one of the 8 major sects in the spirit world, and they cannot tolerate trash like this young man. One bald man with a pointed beard turns to another, saying that he has already seen a young man somewhere, who is now lying on the ground, boiling with anger. He worshipped all the local sects and no one wanted to accept him. It was because his spiritual talent did not meet the requirements of the royal gate of the beast. Y got up from the ground in anger and pointed his finger at a fat guy with pierced ears, a bunch of rings on his fingers and chains, and asked why then this guy was accepted. But Y was not. The man standing next to the fat man, throwing his arm over his shoulder, replied to Y that this same fat man, the son of Zhao, had paid 10,000 spiritual stones. The man called Y a bum and asked if he wanted to join too. Sun Zhao, taking out a bag of spiritual stones, asked the man how he would like to find a place to improve their relationship tonight. At the sight of the stones, everyone's mouth watered. Everyone started shouting that Yishengu would reserve a seat tonight and Zhao Gongzi would pay for everything. The crowd began loudly chanting his name and praising him. Y considered these actions very unfair, because who said that without spiritual roots and spiritual stones it is impossible to cultivate? Maybe she is a hidden genius. Y thought to himself that if he hadn't sealed himself 900 million times, he wouldn't have ended up in such a place. Suddenly, the man, hearing the word genius, decided to give Y one chance and gave him a dog that looked like a cute sleeping dog, with the condition that if he defeated the dog, he would be allowed to enter the royal gates of the beast. Y. who was angry because everyone was mocking him because they thought he couldn't beat a small dog, rolled up his sleeves and shouted that he could beat this dog with one blow. The man with the ponytail shouted loudly and the dog, waking up, turned into a huge devilish black dog with burning eyes. Y. did not expect this and thought that something was wrong. He shouted loudly for help when this huge black dog jumped on him, and began to shout why this dog suddenly became so ferocious. Everyone started laughing at the young man and calling him trashy. The crowd shouted what garbage he was, since even a dog would win him. Y ran away from the dog, warning those bastards from the Beast Royal Gate to wait. All this fascinating performance was watched by 2 beautiful divas who were standing on the roof. The one with black hair, named Shen Dahua, could not believe that the person they had been waiting for so long had finally appeared. A blonde named Huang Ermao asked her sister if they were going to eat rice noodles. The brunette closed her eyes, putting her fist to her forehead, asking her sister how she hadn't eaten enough yet after eating 10 buns. The blonde replied that only half, and needed another 20 while stroking her stomach. Shen Dahua replied to her sister that they don't have money now, but if they can recruit a young man who runs away from a dog, then in the future they will eat whatever they want, and will never be afraid that they will run out of money. Y. stood in the forest, where leaves were falling from trees all around, and looked at the dog, which already looked quite like an ordinary dog. He shouted to the dog to get behind him, calling him a damn dog. The dog, who turns out to be able to talk, showed Y the middle finger on his little paw with the words, "How this bastard garbage infuriates him." The dog turned his back to the guy, wagging his tail in different directions. Y. on the other hand, lamented with a cry how he could be offended by a simple dog. Y raised his fist with thoughts that he originally wanted to learn this technique after joining the sect, then slowly removed the seal to master his own power. But now that the dog has dared to provoke him, he won't take it anymore. With the words "get it," Y moved towards the dog, while she barked and rushed in response. They came together in a tough fight, accompanying a tough fight with curses, blows and slaps. The dog bit hard, Y. fought back. 30 minutes later, Y, who was sitting leaning against a tree, all bruised and scratched. Without breaking the seal, he can't even beat a dog. Following the proudly departing dog, Y shouted that sooner or later he would destroy her sect and would definitely take revenge. The young man was sitting very sad and shedding tears with a stream of cruel injustice when 2 beautiful girls turned to him. One of them had a mustache and a thin beard. The brunette turned to the guy, saying that she had finally found him. At a young age, there are strong bones in the body, and this is a rare cultivator of immortality for a century. If one day Y passes the 8th meridian, he will become immortal. The blonde who was standing next to her, in order not to reveal the conspiracy of her sister pretending to be a man, agreed with her words and said that she was right, and that this was a beautiful seed. Wai wondered who was in front of him. The brunette replied to the guy that in this mortal world, no one but her could find the extraordinary Wai Dado. Today, students are accepted to heaven and invite Wai to their sect. Abruptly, the blonde, Wang Ermao, shouted to her sister that her mustache was falling off. Wai guessed to himself that there were two real liars in front of him. Shen Dahua, admitting the failure of her operation, took off her false mustache and beard and replied to Wai that it did not matter and did not matter at all. She took out some colorful books and said that these were the secret books of their sect, passed down from ancient times. As long as Wai Dado is in their sect, he can use any technique at will at any time. The young man shone in front of his eyes, smiling all over his mouth, considering the opportunity a real blessing, not believing that so much could be used. Now he is sure that the girls are not deceivers. The blonde asked her sister where she got so many of these techniques. Wang Ermao always thought that they only had one basic technique, the sword technique. The brunette replied that she used all the remaining money to buy them, and judging by the names of the techniques, this ignorant guy can definitely be recruited. Ermao called out to her sister reproachfully. The brunette returned to Wai and asked what he thought about it, because her sect had just appeared in this world and he could be the first disciple. From now on, Wai will be the master of Kaishan. Let him not miss the opportunity, because there will not be another such chance. Wai cunningly replied that he wanted all the techniques and snatched them out of the brunette's hands. She laughed, considering the guy too confident and saying that she definitely likes him. From now on, he will be a great disciple of the Shen Dahua sect. She told Wai that the task of maintaining world peace now rests entirely with him. Mentally, Shen Dahua was very happy that there were already 3 people in her sect, and according to the rules, you can apply for the opening of a sect. Finally, Wai Dado enthusiastically replied to the girl that he would definitely not disappoint the teacher's expectations. It's a real stroke of luck for a guy to join a sect and get so many techniques. The insidious souls of Wai and Shen thought in an instant that everything was finally going according to their plan. On a huge square in the very center of the city of Tenjin, one sunny day, a lot of people gathered. Touts from all sides shouted that you can get a prize for a broken big stone. On the other hand, they shouted about very tasty candied meat, how crispy and sweet it tastes, and it's also on a stick. People passing by discussed that the works of some ancestors could be large and small, thick or long. A little further on, the child constantly begged his mother for a candy from a candy uncle, repeating his request 1,000,000 times. A short-cropped middle-aged man fascinatingly but incomprehensibly told someone that a certain Zhao Zilong, 7 Ying and 7 Chengbanpo, with 36 techniques and silver spears is really very cunning and cruel. The murdered Chengbanpo was defeated and truly deserves to become a generation of tigers. The one to whom the man was telling all this turned out to be Shen Dahua. When she was even younger, she also really enjoyed listening to teachers tell her these interesting stories. The man went on to say that Chengbanpo is not as simple as it seems, but it looks like a flower and it is the highest class Ihanuan. The sky and the earth are dark, the sun and the moon dim only together. He held up his index finger, ending his long story. The blonde suspiciously asked her sister what kind of nonsense this strange guy was talking about, while really not understanding what your Ihanuan was. Shen Dahua abruptly grabbed Wang Ermao's hand and led her away from this place, telling her not to ask so many different questions. Wai stared at them in disbelief, but followed the girls. On the way, Wai Dado asked the girls why he didn't see other disciples from their sect. The brunette replied that all the members of the sect are right in front of him, and she is the only and unique leader here. The blonde turned out to be the deputy leader, and the girls stood up in a really cool pose, pointing at Wai, as if saying that the last participant is him. He is also their disciple. Wai Dado stared at the 2 beautiful girls in disbelief, his big eyes bulging and not believing that there were only 3 people in their sect. Mentally, he hoped very much that he had not been deceived. The brunette pulled the guy close to her, explaining that their sect is a legendary hidden sect, which is why there are so few people. The sect's goal this time is to rule the world again. When there are more students, Wai's responsibility as an older brother will be very, very important. He, in turn, replied that he would try and really work hard. Shen enthusiastically announced their future plan, telling them that first they would go to the old Zongman archive to apply for the opening of their own sect. This is the only way they will be able to gather as many students as possible. This is where their first step towards the prosperity of the secret sect begins. After a while, already in the office of the Zuman archive, a man in a dark robe and with a bun on his head was tossing a small bag of money in his hands. With a grimace on his face, looked at the 3 poor fellows who were sitting sad and dejected at the threshold, saying that they should stop dreaming about a sect without disciples. Shen solemnly asked when these rules for accepting applications had changed. The blonde was swearing that they had taken away as many as 10 tails for nothing. At that time, Y was sitting and thoughtfully talking out loud about the fact that according to the guy with whom they communicated, there were no special requirements. While there is a plot of land, Y Dotto abruptly stood up and asked the brunette how about they just stay there. He pointed with his hand to the side, at a small shabby building with peeling paint. The girls enthusiastically accepted the guy's offer, agreeing with the idea that their student is really smart. They will finally have their own, real secret sect. The shadow falls on the face of the statue of a gray-haired man with a large mustache framing his mouth, and a very thick beard. 3 young men stand in front of him. Each of them stands in a special stand, resting one fist on the other palm, and introduces himself as a disciple of Dadaeaman Y Dotto, Master Dadaeaman Shen Dahua, and Deputy Master Dadaeaman Huang Ermao. According to the testimony of the Earth God, they will restore the Dadaeaman sect. They really want to revive the sect of the kings of the world. Suddenly, some strange extraneous sounds are heard near the statue, and the blonde stared in shock towards the statue, thinking that none other than the god of the earth himself had come to them. There is an old folk saying, an oath given by people with a high cultivation base will touch heaven and earth. Y Dotto suddenly suspected something was wrong, telling his master, Shen Dahua, that something was wrong here. Because of the statue, a man in old shabby, torn and dirty clothes suddenly appeared, who asked the visiting guests why it was so noisy here on the territory of the homeless. Why can't they let him sleep any longer? Blonde Ermine was surprised that there are other people besides them here and asked Shen what they should do now. Shen reassured her sister, asking what they were afraid of. It's just one person, and that's a homeless person. She shouted at that strange man to get lost, because now this is their territory. A man with disheveled hair looking in all directions laughed in response and said that he would give them a warm welcome here. He came out in front of the statue and stood in a stance on one leg, hands clasped together, when instead of him, in an instant, many pumped up bald fighters appeared, waving their huge fists tied with special white ropes. The 3 young men stared in shock at the muscular fighters, noticing that they were all incredibly strong, even though they were homeless. A man in ragged clothes at the head of strong, muscular fighters threw all 3 out into the street, ordering them to get out of this place immediately. From such cruel treatment to themselves, they fell to the ground, receiving many bruises and bruises. Shen looked angrily at the men walking back into the building. The man, the one with disheveled hair, lamented that having such power, how did they dare to cause unrest on their territory? Well, nothing. They have already been taught a lesson and now they cannot even be afraid. Bald fighters laughed at the young men, saying how weak they were. One jock yawned with gusto, dying of boredom. At this time, the blonde, still lying on the ground and rubbing her bruised waist, still could not believe that this had happened to them. The sister grabbed Ermao by the hand and ordered her to get up from the ground. After those men used their Zongman sword techniques, those who were chasing them are most likely already on the way. The blonde replied to her sister that they were still wounded, but did not understand what they should do without having a territory with Dadaeaman. Shen told her sister not to worry too much, and that they would not give up, because there would always be a day when they could revive the sect. Ermao clung to her sister's chest and began to cry, saying that she felt terribly guilty. Y Dotto seemed to have just come to his senses and stared at the book that was lying on the ground nearby. He thought that if he could learn this unusual technique, then he would be able to capture this territory. He picked up the book from the ground with the thought that he would just try, and his eyes lit up red. An immense force appeared around him, illuminating everything around with a bright yellow color. It turned out to be so simple, Y is able to easily master a new technique. Meanwhile, the sisters were discussing that they needed to find another place for their sect. But suddenly they turned to their disciple, who was standing behind them, and assured them not to worry, because he would definitely cope with those fighters who had kicked them out. The girls stared at Dotto, not understanding how he would defeat those men. To which the young man replied that he had just finished reading the primordial techniques of cleansing the body of demons and gods. It will not be difficult to defeat these smelly bums. Y smiled cunningly as he said these words. Y Dotto thought to himself that he was really a genius, since he had mastered such an amazing technique. And the master and her deputy should be very proud of their student. The girls stared at Y in disbelief, not understanding how he was able to master such a technique, and wasn't it created by the Taoluman sect. The brunette asked the young man if this was the original technique of cleansing the body of a demon and a god. The same man in ragged clothes stood with both hands up and admired the technique he used. This is something like a primo of something there, from which a hole in the sky can appear. Muscular bald fighters, laughing all together with a homeless guy over a guy who allegedly learned a deadly technique, and now wanted to show it. Apparently, Y is completely tired of living. The second fighter practices heavenly and earthly immortality, the indestructible sun and moon, and the immortality of light. Everyone laughed again, calling the kid a street comedian. Suddenly, Shen whispered to Y, who began to say that the technique of cleansing the body of the primordial demon god is the most difficult to study. She thinks Y needs to practice even better. The blonde agreed with Shen, saying that it was great that the great disciple had returned. But still, Y Dado, absolutely self-confident, assured the head of the sect and the master prophet that he had really honed this technique and was going to show it to them. Y tore a hair from his voice with the thought that after studying the technique, you need to remove the seal. Now he will check if he can control the strength of the sealed layer with it. The man stood next to Y and openly mocked him, talking about a good atmosphere, and for the guy to continue in the same spirit. Provoked him on purpose that Y hit him right in the face. For him to use that stupid demon god technique of his. Y exhaled and suddenly became so big and strong. There were horns on his head and he glowed bright orange like a real fire. Since the homeless man asks so much, Y Dado will gladly fulfill his request. The man got scared, tried to stop the guy. But it was too late when Y knocked the man out with one blow. Rocks and splinters were flying everywhere, as if this was a real battle. The bald fighters who were watching all this stood in shock with their mouths open. They couldn't believe that their boss had fallen from a single blow from this kid. How is this even possible? Meanwhile, the sisters also stood in shock that their student had actually learned the technique, and did not believe that it really existed. The guy, having assumed his real appearance, exhaled heavily and was upset because one strand of his hair is one of the sealed layers and its release did not lead to an energy release. He realized that the energy contained in the first layer was controlled by him thanks to the technique of cleansing the body of the primordial demon god. Y raised his fist, thinking to himself. Meanwhile, in Shenhutsung, a gray-haired man in a red robe stood in front of a huge deity with a staff. This gray-haired man turned out to be a fire god, with a small fire symbol painted on his forehead. He reasoned that 500 years ago there was a sudden split of the three statues of the suns and now God has descended again. So the prophecy of the year was true. In the Messiah clan, on top of a large rock at the foot of which there were a lot of swords, the great heavenly sword was invoked. A gray-haired man, who turned out to be the head of the sword clan, called for this very sword and said that about 1,000 years ago, 9 venerable masters who could predict the future and replenish yin and yang were going to retire. The prophecy left in the distant past is true. Meanwhile, in the magnificent beauty of the Xuanwu Palace, which was hidden among the clouds, words were heard about what this prophecy said. When the Son of God descends, the devil will be born. The 9 kingdoms will begin to move, and the heavens and earth will suffer a catastrophe when the sword of light appears. However, part of the prophecy is not yet complete. 9 venerable masters will retire. A beautiful maiden with magnificent long white hair, the head of the Xuanwu Palace, who spoke about the prophecy, suddenly stumbled, wondering who is the Son of God and who is the devil, and whose light carries this sword in itself. At the same time, in the Tianji sect, the oldest Tianji was sitting in the lotus position with his eyes closed, throwing naked flashes of light around him. Suddenly he fell forward, gasping, saying that it was calculated in the celestial city of Tianshan. Others rushed to the fallen man, shouting that the calculations of the ancestor Fr. The heavens are unfaithful. They were calling for help, asking to bring a Ju pill to restore life. The place of settlement turned out to be the city of Tianshan, and all the supreme sects need to be notified about this. In the city of Tianjin, 2 sisters looked at a book and considered what was written to be completely absurd. The book must have turned out to be a fake, because the girls did not understand how Y Dado would have to understand and learn it. The brunette completely agrees with her sister, because they have to represent the ancestors of demons and heavenly gods, and this is not possible at all. Whoever saw the ancestor of the devil and the heavenly god? Suddenly, a student called them and asked what they thought about all this. The girls replied that Y can understand the execution technique in just one day because she is of average level. He should not stop there and should continue to work hard. Y asked the leader not to worry, because there are still a lot of techniques ahead that he will be able to study in the future. He will continue to study hard and study each of them. The 2 girls looked at Y Dado with dreams in their eyes, because if he can learn all these techniques, then he really is a genius. Meanwhile, the beaten homeless man, who was standing only due to the fact that fighters were holding his arms on both sides, was swearing at the guy who defeated him, because how dare he hit the boss when he wasn't even ready for it. Despite all his cool tricks, a man will not tighten his tail like a cowardly mutt and will not give up. The bald fighters agreed with the boss, saying that Y Dado did not think that such a force would force them to surrender. Even if he beats them, they will come back tomorrow again. There are only 3 of them, and the fighters do not think that they will be able to stay here for a long time. The witch group of fighters is dispersed throughout the city. The blonde told her sister that if they continued, even if they prepared a sect, they would have problems finding disciples in the sect. Shen replied not to worry, because she had thought out a plan to drive the fighters out of this place. Ermao and Wei stared at the leader in surprise, not believing their ears. With a belligerent attitude, the leader turned to her enemies with a proposal that they would beg together, and whoever earns more will get this place. Wei Dado and Iram did not expect this and were just shocked. The fighters asked if they really wanted to beg with them, and the boss said that he would fight with Shen. But if they lost, they would have to join their gang and become subordinates of the man. Shen agreed to the deal and the man, throwing away his crutches, shouted with a belligerent cry, "Let's start." The blonde indignantly asked her sister why she was so sure that they would be able to defeat this gang. Because they are professional beggars, and they have no chance of winning at all. Shen did not share Ermao's feelings, because it was just begging. In order to restore the sect, they cross the eagle path and begging is nothing along the way. And so are other beggars. This is what Shen really wanted, to compete with really professionals. Shen, using his natural beauty and charm, slightly lifting the edge of his dress and putting one foot forward, believing that it was already impossible to use such simple methods in this world. But if you want to be a leader, you should be able to use all the chances. She called out to some man, calling him handsome, and asked him for 2 silver lan, because she was also pathetic in this torn outfit. The man, blinded by the beauty of the brunette, seeing only hearts in his eyes, easily gave the girl the stones. Ermao, looking at all this, wondered how her sister managed to get the stones so easily. She replied that Shen was selling rather than begging. The brunette quickly put her sister to sleep, saying that this is a more modern method of begging. Seeing how easy it was to get the stones, Wei was confident that he would succeed too. Huang Ermao and Shen Dahua tried to stop Wei by telling him that he could not use the same begging method as Shen. But it was already too late. Wei, wearing a woman's skirt, showed everyone his hairy legs, considering the leader's way too dangerous, and while he is studying, he will be able to earn a few lions of silver. Approaching a strange girl, Wei Dado leaned his leg against the wall next to her and asked if she could give him some silver. But contrary to all the expectations of the guy, he got a juicy punch in the face. Lying on the ground, he did not understand why he got hit in the nose, because he followed the leader's method. Why did it fail? The gang, watching all this at the head of their boss, laughed wildly at the guy. The man asked Wei if he really considers himself a beggar now, because in this way he only insulted the profession. The man told the fighter standing next to him to show the student how to treat women. The muscular man approached the girl, including all his charm, and called her a beauty, said that he only saw her among this crowd. The girl dressed up from the words that she looks just wonderful, and every time she smiles, it makes his heart flutter. The diva asked what he was doing. The bald man replied that he wanted to take the glow of the sunset and give it to her. He wanted to preserve this moment of eternity, and travel around the world with the girl to see her beauty every day. He asked if she wanted the same. The girl, unable to withstand such pressure, screamed loudly, "I will agree to all the proposals of a beautiful man." 3 young men stood in complete shock from what they saw, and could not believe that a bald fighter could seduce that woman so easily. The boss turned to Wei and, raising his index finger up, said that this was their job and they dared to challenge the gang in begging. For a second, the boss appeared in the guise of a god dressed in white robes, spread his arms to the sides and called them amateurs. The blonde breathed out in resignation and said that it was over and asked her sister what they should do now. She doesn't want to join the beggar clan. Huang Ermao hurried her sister to help her come up with a new plan as soon as possible. In the sweat of her brow, Shen thought about how strong the aura of these beggars was, and doubted whether all this was the true sphere of professionals. She underestimated and did not expect that their ability to beg would be so strong. The boss asked how it was evaluated at all and said to wait for the day when their clan would grow, and become the largest and strongest sect in Tianshan City. And their luck will grow even more. It is then that their ability to beg will be able to reach the top, because everything can be in demand. Even if it is the sun, it will be the same as women and he will be able to do with them whatever his heart desires. A man wants it to rise when it rises, but he wants it to sit down, then it will sit down. Wei stared at the man in disbelief, not understanding how he could get the sun. Isn't it under the control of the great god of the 6 suns? If so, then, a man interrupted Wei's thoughts, saying that since they had lost, it was time to fulfill their promise. They should join their beggar clan. The bald men shouted in unison to admit defeat if they were ready to bet. They laughed, saying that it was very brave of them to compete with the clan and the ability to beg. In fact, Wei is just asking for trouble. They lacked a maid to wash their feet, and two beautiful girls were just the right candidates for this case. Waidato stopped the fiery speech of the brawny ones, asking them to wait. If he can make the sun rise and set now, does that mean he's stronger than a man? He stared at the guy in incomprehension. The girls standing behind their student said that now is not the time for jokes at all. The blonde called Wai a fool, because how can he make the sun obey his commands? Wai ignored the mentors and asked the boss again that if he succeeded, did it mean that they would win the competition? Suddenly, the man burst into unrestrained laughter, believing that Waidato had become mute because he had lost. Does he know what level he needs to reach in order to do what he has planned? The beggar clan has been inherited for thousands of years. They have countless disciples, but only their patriarch has reached such a level. And Waidato just talks about how he can do it now. How funny. The bald man laughed, calling the voice nonsense, and asked Wai who he thinks he is if he thinks he can command the sun. One muscular man replied that if Wai managed to do it, he would eat 3 kilograms of shit. The blonde put her palm to the forehead of the student, checking if he has a temperature. Otherwise, why is he talking complete nonsense? Shen Dahua told Wai that she understood his determination to help the Daodu sect, but he could only do what he could. Wai cupped his palms together and called the sect leader and her deputy to take a look. In his mind, he called out to the great god of the 6 suns, sending his thoughts far into the sky. Meanwhile, in the divine domain, the divine palace, the great god of the 6 suns shouted to the ladies and gentlemen that they needed to properly celebrate the departure of Wade before, so the divine domain is going on a 1,000-year break. He was standing in sunglasses, holding a cigarette between his teeth, and shouting for everyone to get high properly. There were color projectors everywhere, loud music and unrestrained dancing. The crowd shouted that Waidato was finally gone and their new life had come. Tonight they have to drink until they get drunk. God was having fun with the others and smiling broadly until it seemed to him that Wai was calling him. A blue-haired young man dressed only in trousers approached the god, however, like the Lord of the Suns himself, and began to laugh at how the god of the 6 suns got nervous. How can he hear Waidato if he has already descended to the lower world? Suddenly, Waidato's loud voice rang out, and now everyone who was at the party heard it too. Waidato was calling the divine king of the 6 suns. Everyone present was just shocked by what they heard and did not understand how this was possible. The king and the blue-haired guy fell backwards, not believing that it was really Wai's voice. Someone shouted that he didn't know how the others were, but he was definitely getting out of this place. The other king said that he was going to the world of emptiness and would lock himself in there for the next 10,000 years with a request not to disturb. The beast god hasn't unleashed the dragons yet, so he's also leaving quickly. Suddenly, the beautiful maiden stopped everyone. Her divine telepathy showed no signs of Waidato's presence. Perhaps he uses telepathy to make his voice heard here. Kings and lords exhaled with relief, agreeing that this was not a real Wai, but just a sound. The lord with red hair was talking to another king about how he had just heard the young man's voice himself and could not understand whether Wai was really calling the divine king of the 6 suns. Why should he call him at all? Did you miss me? Meanwhile, the Lord of the Suns was sitting on the floor and almost crying from having to deal with this Waidato again. He has already descended to the lower world. What else does this devil need? What a pity that the king turned into a god, because what good is this immortality? He was supported from all sides, telling him to hold on because he is the only one who is the strongest human shield. Other gods and lords will surely cover his rear. That same beautiful lady silenced everyone and asked them not to talk about any nonsense. It is worth checking first what Waidato needs. She put her hands forward and a small portal opened in front of her, which glowed with a bright blue light. A young man's face appeared in it. The crowd was pushing in the hope of also seeing the portal and what was inside it, and everyone really wanted to hear what Wai needed. He continued to call out to the divine king of the 6 suns, starting to say something about his son. And everyone immediately began to offer condolences to the king. The Lord of the Suns wept bitterly, saying that he could not bear it anymore. After all, there are so many cannon fodder around, and Wai is aiming at him alone. The king got used to his 9 sons, now he has only 6 of them left, and Wai wants to take these 2. How can the king live now? A beautiful girl interrupted him and said that the king was wrong, because Waidato did not need his son. He just wanted it to obey his commands. The voice of the guy could still be heard from the portal, saying that the divine king of the 9 suns, let the sun obey him. If the Lord continues to pretend to be deaf, he will come and find the king. The king stared at the portal in shock, not believing whether Wai would really dare to come after him. Everyone present insisted that Waidato should not return for anything in his life. He just needs to be listened to. The gods will be punished for interfering in the lower world, but he will definitely not return this way. Everyone must help the divine king of the 6 suns to create a strong shield and as quickly as possible. The crowd burst into a war cry, raising their hands up, ready to help in creating a shield, while the king himself sat slowly digesting what had happened. A huge transparent ball with black patches appeared in space, from which many multicolored light rays emanated. This very ball meant freezing. The Lord of the Sun stood, bursting into bitter tears, could not believe that the other gods decided to help him with the shield. The lords and kings stood with their hands raised up, holding a huge shield. They told the old 6 that they would definitely withstand a couple of blows of holy thunder. Let the king not forget the common goals and dreams for the sake of preserving the peace and harmony of the world of the gods. Dado will never return. The king of the 6 suns gathered his courage, put his palms together and his eyes lit up bright red. He told his companions not to worry, because the king would never allow Dado to return, even if he had to lay down his bones for it. A lot of fireballs formed around, most likely suns. One broke through the clouds and rushed to the sky, to the ground, while purple lightning began to emanate from him. Meanwhile, a lot of people gathered on the streets of Tianshan around Dado, surprised that the young man has been standing in the sun for almost an hour. People wondered who he was and what kind of performance he was right in the middle of the street. Someone from the crowd replied that this guy boasted to everyone that he could command the sun in the sky, and that's why he was trying so hard. The crowd laughed at the nonsense they heard. Who can command the sun in the sky at all? This guy has gone crazy. Or else how did he go crazy, thinking that the Lord is God? The sect leader turned to her sister to bring Dado back, otherwise he would become a laughing stock for the whole city if he continued to stand like that. The blonde did not want to go there, into the crowd of people, because she was terribly ashamed of their disciple. The boss of the beggar clan asked Dado to stop wasting their time. Even if he stays here until nightfall, the sun will still not obey him. The bald fighters laughed again, nodding to the boss and saying that maybe the student planned to stay here until night. If he commands the sun, then they are all reincarnations of the great god. The muscular guys shouted at Y to just admit defeat, because as long as the beggar clan is here, his sect will never be created. Dado stood with his eyes closed, frowned heavily and listened to all the shouts from the crowd in his direction. Suddenly, the sky erupted with raging thunder and bright lightning. People screamed, not understanding where such strong winds could come from. Everyone immediately began to run home because of the coming thunderstorm and heavy downpour. They urgently needed to find a place to hide from the storm. Dado lifted his head up, smiling happily at the arrival of the sun. He could literally feel the sun coming under his control. The girls stood with their mouths open, being at a loss, and did not believe in what was happening. The clan of beggars fussed, because the wind and thunderstorm came as if from nowhere. It was all the fault of this worthless child. He can't command the sun, it's just impossible. The leader of the beggar clan shouted that it was impossible. Does this boy really think he can fool him with his stupid jokes? Let him prove it immediately. Y laughed insidiously, calling the dog boss Wang, who should open his dog eyes and look at him carefully. The young man raised one hand up, calling to the sun to listen to his command and come out. He shouted as if he was channeling all his strength into this order, clenching his hands into fists. The sun appeared through the clouds and everyone who was there was stunned by what they saw. The girls could not believe that their student really commands the sun and shouted that it was just a real dream. Y grinned, asking everyone if they were now convinced that he could command the sun. All the fighters of the beggar clan immediately knelt down, bowing to the young man, and began to shout that they were really convinced now. They folded their hands in a prayer gesture, begging the Lord not to execute them, because now Y is their light in darkness, their only legend. While the entire clan of beggars bowed before the disciple, the boss stood there like an idol and could not utter a word. Dado called him, calling him a dog. He didn't look as confident as he had before. He started pointing at the guy with his index finger, saying that actually, the sun is already in the sky, and in general, what kind of command is this? Lang asked Y to summon the sunset, since he really has such power. The boss could not accept the fact that Dado could really be the Lord of the Suns. Y replied to the beggar clan boss that he would do as he wished, and putting two fingers together, wished the sunset. The sun lit up with a bright fire, and everyone present, including the sect leader and her deputy, stood with their mouths open. No one imagined that sunset would really appear. Wang was more amazed than everyone else. Suddenly, everything was shrouded in pitch darkness, and people could not understand what was happening and who turned off the light. The fighters turned to the head of the clan, saying that no one turned off anything, because it seems that the sun has disappeared. They offered the boss to surrender, because this child, Dado, can really command the sun. At this time, in the abode of the gods, sitting under the huge stone columns that held the ceiling, as if it was made of ice, the gods rested. They worked so cohesively and defended themselves against a sacred threat. This day will go down in history. For the first time, gods from all over the world of gods worked together with one common goal. They were sitting on the floor, all out of breath, tired and battered, with small wounds everywhere. The sacred thunderstorm turned out to be a heavenly punishment, but not the worst return of Waidato. That's right, the Lord of the Six Suns said, getting to his feet and clasping both hands in a supportive gesture. Stopping Waidato from returning is really worth getting hit on the head by the sacred thunderstorm a few more times, he said. Bright blue lightning flashed in the sky, flashing everywhere and everywhere. The gods did not expect this, and the king of the Six Suns stood in perplexity, because before that he had spoken just as a joke, which turned out to be true. The gods gathered in a circle, wondering what was happening on Earth, and why the storm clouds were thickening again. Waidato has done something again. Another god turned to the king and asked him to look at what was happening on Earth with his son. The Lord of the Sun stood there, shedding tears in resignation, and replied that it was too late. He was standing under a sparkling blue sky. All the gods were struck by lightning, they screamed, receiving electric shocks. In the city of Tianchen, Waidato controlled the sun with just one finger, making the sunrise and sunset, moving the sun across the sky in different directions. He played with it, as if the sun was a toy for him, and had a lot of fun, laughing at his own actions. Fans shouted that the sun was setting and then disappeared altogether, and then reappeared and disappeared again. Everyone seemed to have gone crazy. The head of the beggar clan shouted that he couldn't take it anymore, covering his eyes with his palms. He finally fell to his knees, shouting to Wai that he was giving up. He pulled out a piece of paper in front of him, handing it to the young man, and said that he confessed it was a document for the destroyed palace. Wang begged to be accepted. "I beg you, stop it," shouted the boss, bursting into bitter tears, because a little more and they will all go blind. Waidato looked at everyone with a grin and said that he would be merciful and let them go, since they all sincerely admitted that they were wrong. He lifted the Cura up, directing the sun behind the clouds, and ordered him to return to his place. And the young man thought to himself that he had had a lot of fun and hoped very much that he had not caused the gods too much trouble. The crowd of people watching these performances all the time made sure that this guy is really the Lord of the Sun. He must be a saint who came down from heaven. Some man thought that Wai was the bastard of some god. A man interrupted the crowd's reasoning, saying that they were all wrong. It turned out to be the chief salesman and senior disciple of the sect of deceivers. He also did not have a top of clothes. On his head was a bandage with the inscription "Everything is a hoax." "This jerk has no control over the sun," he said. All the people stared at him in incomprehension. It can't be, because the sun obeyed all the commands of Waidato. It rose and set at his behest and everyone saw it with their own eyes. However, someone does not believe that everything that is happening is true, and there is definitely some secret here. Shen and Irma are standing and discussing everything that happened. Dato then applied the technique in the blink of an eye, and now suddenly controls the sun. It definitely deserves attention. Shen replied to her sister that, of course, he showed incredible strength, but their cult is still being persecuted. You cannot often stick out and show yourself in public. The leader hoped that the adherents of the cult of deception would find a suitable explanation for everything that is happening. We need to listen to what they have to say. The senior disciple of the sect of deception began to explain something to people on his fingers. He said that he was focused on one point right now and was only following it. He put his index finger and thumb together and pointed out how small the distance between the two focus points was. He realized that the kid was using an illusion and wanted to confuse everyone. The girl stood a little further away than the others and understood that this strange man was talking complete nonsense, and that only real morons would believe him. Meanwhile, people, as if waking up from oblivion, suddenly realized that it was true. After all, no one could control the sun, and no one ever could. The sisters were shocked that the crowd changed their minds so quickly. There are only idiots around. A disciple of the sect of deceivers intends to reveal the secret of Waidato because he is familiar with all the ways of deception. He took out 5 books, apparently with techniques that are related to deception. He opened them like a fan and showed them to people. So that no one else would be fooled, he decided that he would sell all the books on deception. The man announced the price of 2 silver coins for the book and people were bursting to buy. There was a real crush. People were fighting for books, pushing each other in the hope of picking up the best copy. Irma couldn't understand why this lunatic was trying to cram his books into everyone. This deceiver clan is so strange. However, they are distracting attention from Waidato, so it's all the same. Y. Dotto ran headlong, holding the documents for the temple in his hand. Finally, they will be able to rebuild their own clan. The sect leader and her deputy clenched their fists with the thought that their disciple was a good fellow, and they were not mistaken in him. The Trinity began to rejoice and dance on the spot, singing words about the upcoming rebuilt temple. At this time, a clan of beggars stood on the sidelines, discussing Y. Dotto. If you believe the one from the strange cult, then this guy fooled everyone. We need to figure out how to get the documents for the temple back, and we need to start immediately. Wang replied to his students that even if all this is an illusion, do they know a way to fix it? These guys are definitely hiding something, and we need to follow them. Y. Dotto has 100% of some kind of power. If they can lure him to the side of the beggar clan, then he can help their village. Shen Dahua and Huang Ermao were standing near the ruined temple, with grandiose plans to rebuild the cult. This time everything will fall on their shoulders. Their cult is so small, but they will work hard, call more students, and will expand step by step. They will become the #1 cult in Tianshan. With such a belligerent cry, the blonde turned to her sister, took her by both hands, and rushed to hug with a happy face, because they finally did it. Their delight was interrupted by an employee who came up and asked the girls if they had finished rejoicing here. He was about to expel them from the temple grounds when the blonde interrupted him, apologizing for such a violent display of emotions, because they are so happy that. The man said that it didn't matter why they were happy there, let them leave immediately. The brush dipped into a bucket of black paint and the employee began to write something on the wall. Y. Dotto, Ermao and Shen stood behind him and tried to figure out what this man in uniform was doing. When he left, there were only 2 words there for demolition. The Trinity was stunned in an instant, not understanding how these idiots decided to demolish their temple. Why now? After all, they have just decided to restore their cult. The sisters turned to each other and, embracing, began to burst into tears bitterly, realizing that their whole life had gone down the drain. Y. Dotto interrupted the tearful duet of the girls, because the master and her deputy should be happy. The sisters looked at the guy and asked what there was to be happy about. If they destroy the old building, they will be given a plot of land as compensation, and then they will be able to build a majestic building that will attract many new students. The young man stood with his arms outstretched, as if he had voiced the most brilliant idea in the world. The brunette looked at the student in disbelief, because if the house is marked for demolition, the government will demolish it anyway. Ermao put her hand to Y. Dotto's forehead, checking if he had a fever, otherwise why would the guy be talking this nonsense? Meanwhile, the young man was surprised that the girls, it turns out, are so mired in the affairs of the cult that their whole life has passed them by. He said that when the temple is destroyed, compensation will be paid for it, and this is absolutely natural. Y took the girls by both hands and led them to chat with the ruler. Ermao asked the guy how he knows that compensation will definitely be paid, to which he replied that from personal experience. In his thoughts, Y. Dotto wondered whether it was worth mentioning that the great Dobao of the world of gods was built just to compensate for the demolition. A large, beautiful building shimmered under the rays of the sun. Shen, Ermao and Y ran to the government building in the hope of quickly collecting their compensation for the demolition. In the dismantling department, they were met by a bald, short man who gave them the necessary instructions. First you need to register, and then fill out a form. Further, a white-haired woman with glasses was already talking to them, who told them to go to the notary to certify the document, then go to the Ministry of Construction on the 3rd floor. Later, already angry, tired, and out of breath, the guys stood in front of a man with a bun and stubble in the government ministry, and he told them, they say sorry, but they are a department of another ministry and they need to go to the reception to register there. Y. Dotto handed the man at the reception a document of ownership, but he said that his shift was over and they needed to come tomorrow. Suddenly, the guy got so angry that he literally attacked the man and asked him if he really said that his shift was over. From all this running around, Y was very angry. The sisters stood nearby, flexing their fists, as if they were preparing to attack at any moment, and talked about how they had been running around with stupid papers all day in order to hear that this guy's shift was over. If he does not immediately give them compensation, then they will quickly level everything here with the ground. The man was greatly offended by this attitude towards himself and asked what this young man allows himself. He's an official. How dare he hit an official? After that, the brunette rushed at the man with a raised chair over his head and a belligerent cry that she would still kill this man. The 4 of them locked in a tight grip, where Y grabbed the official by the only thing he had left of his hair. He had endured all these adventures for so long. How dare this man complicate things? The blonde screamed that she would beat him half to death. While the man was screaming and calling for help, Already lying on the floor, covered in bruises, bumps and scratches, he raised his hands up with a request to stop, because he does not deal with such issues. It's all the cult of the royal beast. They came earlier and asked the upper classes to give them some land to raise pigs. The cult of the royal class is terrifyingly strong. The ministry simply could not refuse them in any way, although they did not even want to pay the fee. They couldn't do anything. Vi swore with gusto, complaining about this stupid cult. He definitely won't let them go this time. The guy went outside, called the master and her deputy after him. They are sent to personally collect the money for the demolition. Meanwhile, two men were standing in front of the main gate of the royal beast cult. One of them said that the young master and the elders went to Wild Boar Mountain to slay the one-legged Thunder Python King. Their cult is so weak that if they are attacked right now. The second man replied to the first that their royal beast cult is the second strongest in the divine city. Who would dare to show up? Unless someone wants to dig their own graves. Suddenly, a juicy fist flies into one's face, and the person who struck the blow said that he was the one who would dare to show up and attack the cult of the royal beast. Already both men flew back from such a huge fist and a strong blow. After finishing such a small attack, Wide Otto called the master and deputy. He said that this cult has few people now and he offered to level it to the ground. The girls approved of the students' idea and hurried to the gates of this cult. You need to choose the most valuable thing that they will find and take with them. Also, they want to destroy all the statues and leave the cult penniless. The fighters of the cult of the royal beast ran to meet the guys with screams about who dared to break into the territory of their cult. Even if the little lord and the elders are away, no one will let them commit atrocities here. The sisters and Y did not expect that there would be so many of them here. Someone released a dog named Yellow Pikachu and ordered him to tear up the named guests. A huge gray dog with red eyes rushed forward, barking at the strangers. It was as if green lightning was coming from him. Brunette Shen came forward and told Ermao and the student that she would stop these fighters, and they would have to take everything of value that they would find as soon as possible. But the guy was not satisfied with this order, and he said that he would be the one to stop the guards. After all, it was this dog that made him a laughingstock last time, and he wants to deal with her himself. The girls agreed to the offer without any problems, quickly retreating to the other side to look around. Y replied that they should not worry, he would fight. The fighters started laughing at the guy because they remembered him, because he is the same guy who wanted to join their cult, but he was kicked out. He was chased by a yellow Pikachu then, and now he dared to come and challenge. One of the clan members told his brothers not to worry because the pike alone would tear up the guy. Pikachu released his sharp claws and barked, as if to say that this loser really decided that he could defeat him. Today he will show him all his might. And the yellow Pikachu growled menacingly at the guy, showing his snow-white sharp fangs and bright red burning eyes. Wide Otto clenched his hands into a fist and replied to Fluffy that he was no longer who he used to be. Even if Pikachu has changed, he is not his rival. Pikachu cursed in his mind from the fact that so much steel appeared in the guy's eyes. There's clearly something wrong here. Wide Otto released a force that was reflected everywhere in bright red, but it turned out to be only a fist that flew into the dog's face with gusto, and he was carried away from the impact far, far away. The clan brothers stood in shock from the fact that Pikachu was thrown away by only one blow. It's the watchdog of their cult. The students will never defeat this guy. A strategic offensive. Wide Otto said that if they decide to escape, it's too late. The students shouted for the young man to stop, but after a while they all lay on the ground, crippled, with bruises and scratches, and someone even cried. A bunch of these same students formed in the courtyard, and Y was just walking around. All because yesterday they acted ignorantly with Wide Otto, and today he is too much for them. The guy began to look around in search of the master and deputy, because they went in search of everything valuable. But they had been gone for quite some time and Y wondered where they had gone. He turned back abruptly when he heard something. The blonde screamed at Dotto to look at her because she found the most valuable thing and called him for help. Ermao was sitting astride a huge pig with red eyes. Y appreciated the deputy's ability to find everything that brings them money. Meanwhile, outside the gates of the cult of the royal beast, two men were recovering from the attack, and they heard something. One of them tried to say something to the second, but could not utter a word. And what happened was that all the pigs ran away. They were thrown up in an instant by the impact of the pigs. And Wide Otto was riding a pig and laughing because he was taking piglets from the cult of the royal beast as compensation for the demolition of the temple. And all three of them, Shen, her sister Ermao, and Wide Otto, on pigs, rode away for their dream of their own cult. Wang, the boss of the beggar clan, who was watching all this, asked as if from why. but spoke into the void. Did he really steal spiritual animals from the cult of the royal beast, the second most powerful cult in the divine city? Actually, as expected from him, Wang ordered his muscular students to follow the guy. They gladly agreed, saying that finally their leader decided to act and they had already come up with a couple of ways to cope with him. You can't wait a second. However, Wang stunned everyone with the statement that they would help Dotto. The students have a lot of questions left. On the street of the city, people turned around at a loud incomprehensible noise. They couldn't figure out where so many pigs came from. Then the crowd saw that someone was riding on these very pigs. Maybe it's some kind of horseback riding. Someone replied that people must have lost their minds if they were riding pigs. Dotto rode ahead, proving to be powerful and great. Suddenly he stopped because there was a dead end in front of them, a big wall. It's bad and they need to stop all the pigs urgently. He pulled his pig by the ears, but realized that he could not stop her in any way. He wanted to call the leader, but it seems that she has seasickness. Damn dizzy. Looked the other way, at the deputy, but she calmly ate the stolen dumplings riding a pig, running away from the seller, because the blonde did not pay for them. Shouted to Ermal that she was very good at stealing food. He shouted loudly that they were all in trouble because they could not stop the herd of pigs. At this time, Wang ordered the beggar clan to move out. They stood in front of Dotto and the girls, and stared at Dog Wang and his great guards because he didn't understand what they needed. Wang ordered his fighters to shower the pigs with soporific powder, and they rushed to carry out the boss's order. They started doing it like that guy from the famous joke with salt. The powder rained down on the pigs from above, and they fell under the spell of this impossible taste. They were already salivating when the pigs gathered for a moment and became angry, realizing that the powder was poisoned. But then they all fell to the ground at once and fell asleep. The brunette was happy that the pigs finally fell asleep, because she could no longer ride. At this time, the blonde, as always, stroked her stomach with her other hand, saying that she was almost full of dumplings. Van stood in front of the guy and they looked at each other. Asked the beggar clan boss why he suddenly helped them stop the pigs. In Y's thoughts there were doubts about Wang, because he was fighting with them for life and death. Van advised the guy to relax, because he just really helps and he does not pursue any terrible intent. No matter how you look at it, they still have little money. There is a village near the slope of the mountain and its inhabitants are very fond of pork, so Y and his team can sell a couple of their pigs there. And with the money from the sale, they can buy land for themselves and finally rebuild their cult. Y asked Wang why he had suddenly become so kind. The sisters suddenly clung to the student from both sides, hearts in their eyes from the thought that they could buy land and rebuild their cult. They dragged the guy back and said it was a great idea, and they were going to sell pigs right now. Asked the girls to wait, because he had not yet figured out Wang's intentions, but he was told that it was all the same. The main thing was to buy land. And the three of them rode off on one big pig to buy land for the cult. Van stood with his students and looked after those who had left. The fighter asked the leader why the hell he decided to help Dotto with the sale. Wang replied that he likes to take risks, that's why he helped. The jocks asked why to take risks and didn't the boss always say that risk is a thankless task? Why did he suddenly change his mind? Wang asked his students if they knew why he never took risks. They simultaneously replied that it was because their clan was so poor that there was nothing to risk. This phrase hit Wang right in the heart. He raised his hand to his head, replying that this was just one of the reasons. The main thing is that there has never been anything worth risking for, and now it has appeared, and he's willing to bet their entire clan of beggars on this guy. Van will reveal his cards. The disciples did not expect such an answer and could not believe that the leader was ready to bet their entire clan on Dotto. They tried to reason with the leader to be reasonable, because Dotto is a fraud with dirty receivers. There is no perfect dullness and there are no scammers. The leader replied, it's up to them to believe it or not. However, he himself will think that Y is the person he has been waiting for so long. Maybe this guy is the one who is born once in 1,000 years, the named son of the god of the city of Tianshan. Meanwhile, the trio was still riding the pig, and the leader was still sick of the ride. The blonde from behind rejoiced at the prospect of reviving the cult, and Y, sitting between the girls, was silent and only frowned his face. The cult of the royal beast was in complete ruin and confusion. The young master of the royal beast cult, Dai Ziozi, stood and looked at the whole mess. He asked his student where his pigs had gone. He could not speak properly and look into his eyes, only stuttered in an attempt to answer. Just 3 young men broke in and stole spiritual animals. They are too strong and no one could stop them. The guy was trembling all over in front of the gentleman, reporting what had happened. The young gentleman was very angry, not understanding how they could not stop it and why they were needed here at all. He ordered a one-horned thunder python to come out, and immediately a huge purple snake appeared, which scares everyone around with its size and appearance. The speaker stood in shock. The others recognized the python as the demon beast lord of Mount Baemon. They didn't think that the young master would be able to subdue this animal. A huge python likes to eat pigs. Therefore, the young master raised spiritual animals. Dai said that if the pigs were missing, then the students would become fodder for the thunder python. A huge snake opened its mouth and mercilessly regaled one of the students who begged for mercy. The gentleman praised the snake for following the order and asked him to stay with him for a while longer. Dai heard that there are a lot of pigs in the village near Poklane Agora, and they will be able to adjust the python's diet very soon. 3 young men burst into the village near Poklane Agora. Waidato shouted into the gramophone that they had cheap pigs. 3 silver taels for a pig. The freshness of the meat is guaranteed. Shen, Waidato and Irmao stood on the roof of the building and called customers like barkers at the market. They were so desperate to buy land for the clan that they would do anything to get the money. Quite a lot of people have already gathered below, not understanding why some crazy people are shouting on the roof. 3 taels for 1 head, 10 taels for 3. They also give guarantees for the purchase. If the pig turns out to be not tasty, they will refund the money. The pig, standing in the pen, was thinking about her mortal life, about how first she fell into the clutches of a wolf, now she was behind bars. How hard the fate of the pig is. People on the square doubted that the product looked any special. Why do they have to give away as many as 3 taels? The others also agreed with the man who had spoken before. Since they eat pork quite often, they know literally everything about it. If they say what makes their pork so special, then people will buy it. The brunette whispered to the guy that they had made a big miscalculation, because they did not expect that the inhabitants of this village were so picky about pigs. Irmao begged Dado to come up with something quickly. If they can sell pigs, then they won't have any cult. The young man winked at the deputy, smiled at her and told her to imitate his beer. They just need to stand and watch. The girls did not understand what he meant, so they just looked at the departing guy in the wake. Wai recalled that out of boredom, he once read a manual for a sow caring for piglets. It will finally come in handy. The 2 sisters did not understand what the student was up to and what he was trying to find in this pigsty. People complained that all these pigs are not pregnant. However, Waidato tried to assure them that the next one would definitely bring offspring. He pointed to a beautiful pregnant pig with bows on her ears and smiled. He remembered the name of the manual and pulled his hand towards the pig. This cute piggy began to whimper and cry, realizing his fate. Suddenly it became too light and all the people in the square, including the girls, turned away, covering their faces with their hands. No one understood what was going on. People thought the pig was giving birth. Because of the light, they could not see who was rapidly approaching them. Waidato turned to the villagers and called them all to come closer to him. He began to tell me that this pig was born with 18 piglets at once. Each piglet is strong, plump and beautiful. Each will grow up to 300 kilograms. Where else can they get such pigs? Everyone should immediately get in line so as not to miss their chance. The big mother pig was lying on the ground and resting, while her piglets were lying in a row near her stomach. The girls seemed to communicate telepathically, thinking about when Dado was able to learn the local dialect. It seems that the villagers began to sympathize with him. People on the square were very impressed that the pig gave birth to as many as 18 piglets at a time. It seems to be a good breed of pig. The best pig is the one who can give birth. When the piglets grow up, they can eat the pig every day. The trio stood in the center of the people who asked to sell the pigs as soon as possible. He pulled his hands and shouted that they wanted males, females. Waidato held up a blue book above his head and said that the villagers who bought pigs today would also receive an exclusive secret guide. It was written on the book care of pigs after childbirth. The quantity is limited, and therefore they will give out books until their stocks run out. Therefore, local people should hurry up, otherwise they will not get anything if they delay. The leader and her deputy helped people line up in one big queue so that no one pushed. The brunette was happy at the thought that they would get so much silver. Now they finally had hoped to revive the big sword sect. Shen stood and indulged in dreams, smiling all over her mouth. She handed the pig's leash to a passing man. Irmao theatrically said goodbye to the pigs, having already managed to give each a name, and instructed them to behave well. She even asked me to write a letter after giving birth. It was getting close to evening and there was a very beautiful sunset in the sky, illuminating the green mountain with light. Irmao was sitting on a rock, hugging her knees and was sad because all the piglets had already left. She would never be able to see them again. Shen approached her sister and tried to calm her down so that she would not be sad. Dotto had specially prepared a consolation gift for her. Irma shed her head with interest. Y approached the blonde and showed her something that he was holding in his hands. It turned out that there was a very tiny pink piglet with a big bow. Irma was very happy with the gift and raised it over her head, spinning on the spot. Y and Shen stood aside, and the guy admitted that he did not expect at all that the deputy would have such a strong love for small animals. The brunette really hopes that her sister will be able to take good care of the pig. Irma, holding the pig in her arms, laughed angrily and told the piglet that when he grew up, she would make him a meatloaf, fried pork and a hamburger. Suddenly, they heard someone's voice announcing the arrival of the cult of the royal beasts in the village of Pisson Mountain. The head of the village was immediately called. The girls did not understand why the cult of animals was here and whether they had come for them. Y replied that he needed to go and check this guess. He thought that the villagers of Pisson Mountain had bought the pigs he stole from the cult of the royal beasts, and he could drag them into it. At this time, near the entrance to the village of Pisson Mountain, people gathered. Dai was sitting on a chair, holding a mug with some kind of drink in his hands. The headman of the village of Pisson Mountain turned to him and asked what the masters of the cult of the royal beast were doing in this place. He himself was trembling violently from fear of his master. Dai said he would take all the pigs of the Pisson Mountain village and have someone immediately send them to the cult of the royal beast. The elder could not utter a word. He told the gentleman that the inhabitants of his village could not live a day without pork. These pigs are an integral part of the local diet, and if there are no pigs, the gentleman interrupted the elder by saying that no one will die without pork. But if they ignore his order, thereby expressing disrespect for the cult of the royal beast, a lot of people will die in the village of Pisson Mountain today. Huge gray angry dogs stood and growled at the village elder. There was a man standing behind the headman who advised him to give all the pigs to the master, and they can eat chicken, duck, fish. They are ordinary villagers and cannot afford to offend such a big sect as the Royal Beast clan. They will be gnawed to death by these demonic beasts of the second rank, the wolves of the green blood. The elder didn't know what to do. He turned to my lord, saying that they have a person who will send the pigs to the Royal Beast sect immediately. The market price for a pig is about 2 taels of silver. I'm just wondering when the gentleman will pay for them. Dai asked again about the price, and then he gave the silver to the elder. But he did not understand why they gave him so little, because they have thousands of pigs in a mountain village, and the money that the gentleman paid is not enough. Dai stood his ground because he paid as much as he was told. Are they going to retreat now? He clenched his hands into fists and got angry. The headman fell on his knees in front of my lord and said that he was robbing an entire village. The old man begged the gentleman to spare the villagers and give them a little more than 2 taels of silver. At this, Dai pushed the old man away with his feet and asked him who he was to bargain with the master. Everyone immediately ran up to the elder to help him get up from the ground. People were indignant how my lord could hit the village headman, even though he is very old. These gentlemen don't treat them like normal people. Dai stood up, holding a sword in one hand, and said that he was giving them a chance. Either they quickly give up all the pigs or he would take them himself. It's up to them to decide. And don't let them try to bargain, because there are only 2 options. And Dai smiled insidiously. However, later, someone said that there is another option. Suddenly, Y appeared from behind and slammed the gentleman right in the face. Dai flew off to the side. Y Dotto informed the people that the pigs were staying, and drove the named guests away. The residents of Nu thought that the same dealer who gave them pigs actually came to help them. How great it is that all pigs and people are saved. However, one can't rejoice too much, because the Royal Beast sect is very strong. Mr. S. assistants, meanwhile, helped him get up, asking about his well-being. He yelled at them, asking why the hell they were still standing here if they needed to catch and kill that guy. They immediately rushed at Y, shouting about how he dared to attack the Lord. He needs to be taught a lesson and show the power of the Royal Beast. The green blood wolves were also given a command. In an instant, everyone rushed at Y Dotto, who scattered everyone to the sides with one burst of power. The brunette punched the disciple of the Royal Beast clan with her fist and said that she would be responsible until the end. Irma ordered to protect the best piglets from these barbarians. Dai stood in the middle of the battle and was not thrilled that almost all of his fighters were defeated. Y turned to him and said that he had just given him one last opportunity to leave. But since he doesn't want to leave, he will have to stay here today. The student who was lying on the floor told the gentleman that he knew this guy. This is the one who stole all the master's pigs. Dai offered to settle old and new scores in this case. He summoned his huge purple python, and the sky erupted with lightning. The trio stood in disbelief. The young master uses his trump card, because the one-horned python is the highest demonic beast of the 5th rank. He spews heavenly thunder and victory is guaranteed. It's amazing that they are servants of such a monster. The gentleman was encouraging the python that his food was standing in front of him. The python opened its mouth and Y shouted loudly cautiously. After all, it will not be easy to cope with such a monster. The girls were wondering how to kill the master and whether they needed a blade. They also can't use the big blade technique unless absolutely necessary. Y ordered the girls to leave the snake on him while the two of them could just support the guy. Y thought to himself that the strength of the sect leader and her deputy is not as weak as it seems, but they are having difficulty using it, and he simply has no other choice. The girls were not sure if Y Dotto could withstand such a force alone, but still he could handle it. Shen's last thought was that after everything, they would definitely tell Dotto everything.